Welcome to councillors, officers and members of the public and applicants. And we'll just do a round of introductions. I'll just say for fire safety, in event of alarm, please calmly leave by the nearest fire exit, which is that door there or wherever you came in. And the assembly point is by the side of the cathedral. So we'll just do a round of introductions of the councillors and relevant officers, and then we'll get on with things. So I'm Rob. Yep.
I'm Jeremy Livitt from Democratic Services, and I'm the clerking the meeting.
Councillor Richard Eddy.
Councillor Ellie Freeman.
Councillor Serena Ralston.
Councillor Guy Polney.
Councillor Sarah Classic.
I'm Councillor Stayed on McGrubby.
Councillor Zoe Pete.
Councillor Katja Haantjen.
I'm Jonathan Diamond from Development Management.
Thanks, everyone. Moving on, onto agenda item 2. Apologies for absence substitutions. Jeremy, have there been?
Yes, there's one apology from George Calascione, and Councillor Guy Polney is substituting for him.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Agenda item 3 is declarations of interest. This is just to note any interests relevant to the consideration of items on the agenda. Anyone got any of those? Oh, I've got hands. Okay, I'll go to Serena and then Guy.
Yes, I put in when I was a resident, a general member of the public, in March an objection to the original Premier Inn application. But I believe that as that was a separate application, I should be non-predetermined in this case for this separate application that we're seeing today.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, very, very similar. Putting a statement of objection to the previous application for the Premier Inn site. In line with the government guidance, this doesn't rule me out, but I felt the need to make sure that I put on record that I had done that. Thanks.
Thanks, both. Any more declarations of interest? Okay. Let's move on to agenda item 4, which is minutes of the previous meeting held on 4th of December 2024. And this is just to agree the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. Is everyone okay to adopt the minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I will sign them now. Bear with me 1 second. There we go. And moving on to agenda item 5, which is the action sheet. We're requested to note any outstanding actions. There aren't any. So we'll move on straight away to agenda item 6. I think it is, I should say, just while we're on that item, it is important, I think, to have the action sheet just in case there are other things that come up. So I think it's useful to keep it there, even if there's nothing at the moment. Agenda item 6 is appeals. So this is to note appeals lodged, imminent public inquiries, and appeals awaiting decisions. Anyone have anything they want to say about this item? Guy, yeah.
Just to say, obviously, the report's in 2 parts. The first is appeals that are underway, and then there's appeal decisions as the second part. Just say congratulations to officers and our legal team, or at least a job well done. The amount of appeals won is really quite, appeals dismissed, I should say, is really impressive and good to see. The other side was just to flag the number of appeals that we're seeing for against refusals of HMO planning consent. So I would imagine are mostly retrospective as well as a result of previous enforcement action. It was purely wanted to check in. It may be more appropriate for a written response at some point in the future, but just to get a sense of what the basis of those appeals is. Are there common threads that run through those appeals against refusals? It's something I'm particularly close to my heart because of my ward, but if there's a need to strengthen that policy at some point in the future, it'd be good to start looking at it. Equally, if it's purely people don't like having their applications refused and they're all appealing, then that's fine too. Thanks.
Do you want to provide
Yeah, I mean, really just to say I would be happy to provide some further information just regarding the recent decisions that we've received in relation to HMOs. It's something that we are looking at, in particular in relation to how we apply the HMO SPD. I think that's probably like a key feature, but yeah, we'd be happy to provide that information to members after the meeting.
Great. Anything else on appeals at this point? Nope. Let's move on to agenda item 7, which is enforcement, and this is just to note recent enforcement notices. Has anyone got anything they'd like to ask or say about this one? No. And again, just to note that we do have an enforcement session for councillors, which is coming on the 5th of February, I think, at 5 p.m. So please, if you can attend that, that'd be really good. And now I think we're moving on to the public forum for the first item. So the first item, just to say, to be clear, that we take public forum before each application, so before each item, not all together at the beginning, just to be clear about that. So for the first item, which is 38 Albert Road, oh, sorry, yes, thank you, Jeremy, for reminding me. There is also a general question. Is Joe Banks here? No, he's not here. Okay, so Joe has received a written response and can do with that what he wants to. So we'll go on to, the first application 9A, which is 38 Albert Road. Please, could you keep your statements to 1 minute today? We have all had access to those statements. We have, hopefully, amongst the councillors, read those statements. So just summarise what you want to say, make your representation in that 1 minute. So I'll start with A1, which is Will Tomlinson. Is Will here? Thank you, Will.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you for having us here today. I'm pleased that this scheme is recommended for approval. I'm proud that our proposals are well supported and they are presented with no statutory objections. We have worked closely with stakeholders to ensure the delivery of the Bristol Open Flood Defence, Albert Road Boulevard, and a public connection between St Phillips and Temple Island. We are significantly regreening the area and we are dedicating over 50% of the site to public realm. We are committed to ensuring that our scheme adds to the cultural and economic landscape of the city. We are providing high-quality student accommodation, affordable workspace, and delivering a project that goes above and beyond sustainable living policies. I would like to reaffirm our commitment to this long-term investment in the future of Bristol. It is one that will contribute to the city's prosperity and culture for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. We do have A2 as a statement, Joe Downey, but I understand Joe Downey may not be here. Okay, thank you. So A3 is Elliot Kelly. You've got 1 minute, Elliot.
Good evening, councillors. For the last 18 months, we've worked extensively with council officers, the Environment Agency, and Historic England to deliver the scheme before you today, which aligns with the council's growth priorities. We've sought to provide proposals to benefit the wider area and meet aspirations for Temple Quarter as a whole. To do this, the site gives over 50% of its land area to deliver the following benefits: new strategic flood defences, which are needed to enable the construction of up to 4,000 new homes in Temple Quarter, a direct and accessible new public link through the site, and significant active travel improvements for cyclists and pedestrians, including public art, seating, and new trees, along with financial contributions. If members approve this application tonight, we will continue dialogue with the local community and existing stakeholders on detailed design to ensure the highest quality proposals are delivered. We are committed to listening and acting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elliot. The next one is Councillor Yasin Mahmood. Yasin's not here, I don't think.
I think he's there in the...
Oh, he's there. Sorry, Yasin, I was looking up there. Apologies. Go ahead, Yasin.
Oh, yes, welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committees and officers. Good afternoon. As a Ward Councillor for Lawrence Hill, I would like to express my support for this scheme, which, after engaging with the developer over the last year, I believe will bring substantial benefits to both local community and the wider city. This development offers a range of advantages, including economic growth. The development will provide more space, employment, and jobs. Existing site has a discount market rent, and development will deliver economic boost to the local opportunities. Also, flood defences, the developer is funding and delivering flood defences on site. Housing market relief by providing high-quality expert-managed student accommodation adjacent to the new university campus. The scheme will alleviate pressure of the local housing market. Active travel proposal includes generous new active travel links and routes on site. Biodiversity, the scheme will achieve significant biodiversity net gain with over 50% of the site dedicated to high quality public spaces for the community to enjoy. I strongly encourage the Development Control to approve this application and unlock its benefit for the residents of Lawrence Hill and Wool of Bristol. Even though now still we're in negotiation developers with the local community, also something we need to improve the local communities, but we will come up with mutual agreement for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasin. And sorry, I missed you where you were sitting. The next one is A5 from Tony Mead. Is Tony here?
Yes. Good evening, councillors. My name is Tony Mead from Corsavina Wright Architects. We have 13 studios in the UK, including one here in Bristol. We are recognised sector specialists in student accommodation, and we work with developers, operators and universities across the UK. As you've heard, these proposals are for a regeneration of a site with enormous potential in a highly sustainable location. We will be delivering 531 high-quality student beds, supporting the new university campus and helping to free up existing housing stock for single-family use. Underpinning this is exceptional amenity provision, enhancing the student experience and optimising this fantastic riverside location. Our design is rooted in heritage, inspired by the Victorian and industrial materials of the city, while celebrating its key location next to the footbridge. We will deliver a high-quality landscape flood defence and support regeneration of Albert Road with affordable workspaces. We believe this scheme will positively contribute to the emerging regeneration of Temple Quarter and deliver new pedestrian links between Temple Island and St Philip's Marsh for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. That concludes, I think, the public forum for this item. So I think it's over to Susanna for the officer presentation.
Yeah. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. So yeah, you've seen the description of development. The site is located within the Temple Quarter regeneration area, and the council's vision for that area is to create an area of the city which achieves a mix of affordable housing, new employment, addresses the challenges posed by climate change and the ecological emergency, and also promotes sustainable travel. So you can see this slide shows an image of the current site looking west towards Temple Island. So you've got the St Philip's footbridge going across from the existing cycleway by the river, and then the PMG services operation, which we saw today on the site visit, which is a waste ballast management operation. The site would be developed for 531 student bed spaces over 22 stories with 403 square metres of commercial floor space. This slide shows the public realm that would be offered by the development, and as we've heard, the site's very constrained in terms of what it's been asked to deliver in terms of the flood defences that's shown in green on this slide, the new pedestrian link from east to west, and then also the setback on Albert Road to incorporate wider foot widths for the to accommodate the increased pedestrian footfall in the area. So it means that quite a relatively small section of the site can be actually built on. So all of these three public realm aspects are factored in significantly into the balance here, being significant improvements. Also, should note that paragraph 11D of the MPPF applies, and as we know, the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing. And in view of this, the MPPF requires a presumption in favour of sustainable development unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So in terms of design issues, we've got a couple of images of the elevations here. The height does exceed the normal expectation for the development in this area, and 17 stories has recently been approved for the adjacent site to the south. And this was considered at the time to be the maximum height that could be acceptable along Albert Road. We've had extensive discussions with the developers over the course of the application, and it's been always discussed that the development to justify this height should be exemplary in ways such as public realm, livability and architectural quality. And as you'll see from the report, there are conditions that are recommended to secure design details to be submitted to secure these amendments through detailed design. This just shows an image of the original scheme that was submitted to us at pre-app stage, so it has moved on quite significantly since then. This was 24 stories and 594 bed spaces. And just a typical floor layout, one of the residential floors, 340 of the bed spaces are arranged within cluster flats, and then there's 174 studios. You can see on this slide that the corridors for the accommodation are set around the core areas, and one of the issues that has been raised is that there wouldn't be any natural light into these cores. And also on the floors themselves, there's communal amenity space in terms of kitchens and dining rooms for the cluster flats, but not for the studios. But there are other areas at ground floor level and at roof terrace level where there are amenity space provision. There are adequate light levels that are received within all the bedrooms, and the impacts on light levels received by neighbouring developments is acceptable. And just to show you, this is the upper ground floor level. The yellow areas here are the commercial floor space, just to flag in the report that it's seen to be quite a low provision in terms of what is being encouraged in the area. And then these purple areas are for the student amenity spaces. You can also see on this slide the stepped and ramped east-west connection link. And this was the original view through this east-west link. And you can see here there was a lift proposed, which officers originally objected to, and the reasons are set out in the report. And then that was later changed to increase the width of this new pathway, and it would greatly improve the quality of this space with the extra width, allowing the levels on the site to be addressed through a series of ramps and steps. Because of where the flood bund is proposed to be, the level change from that flood defence down to Albert Road is about 4 metres, so it was quite challenging to be able to address that level change passively and without the need to rely on a lift. So that's seen as a positive aspect to the scheme. In terms of the latest iteration of the elevation, this shows that it would be a graded palette of brick colours, and we'd secure materials to be inspected by on-site as a condition. And I just included a few slides showing the views as well. This just shows some context of the site looking west. So you can see next this site, the application site is this one where my cursor is now. I don't know if you can see that, the grey, 2 shades of grey. And then the site to the south is the 40 to 46 Albert Road development. And then in the background there, we've got emerging proposals for Temple Island. And then we've got the Unite scheme on Feeder Road, just over to the right of the slide. This shows a view looking from St Philip's Footbridge from Temple Island, just back towards the site, with 40 to 46 Albert Road on the right. And this is the view that Historic England were referring to in their comments, which shows the site from the station concourse. And importantly, they've said that, as with this slide, the development would be seen in the context of the surrounding developments that are both approved and pending. Just to flag as well that a wind microclimate study was submitted recently, and there hasn't been sufficient time for officers to fully assess this now. But just a couple of slides showing this shows the wind direction from the west here. Officers would just like to seek delegated authority to assess that, because it appears to show a couple of aspects that we would want to explore further with the applicant. So the recommendation is therefore to approve, subject to the resolution of Section 106 and conditions, with an addition to the student management plan condition to ask for the safety measures on the roof terraces, and also seek delegated authority to assess and determine the impacts of the wind microclimate study. That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Can I just start by saying that I've got a number of questions, and I think I've sent them to you in advance, but I'm aware that there will be a lot of members probably on this one. So I'm happy for you to, if possible, members, could you just do your questions all in one go, if that's possible? Just because then we can get through everyone's questions rather than going back to people, if that's okay. I would like to start, honestly. I've got a number of questions, particularly around the heights of the building, if that's okay with members. So the first question is to do with the report, which cites, policy DM26, and that requires new development to respond positively to the site, creating and enhancing public spaces and responding appropriately to height, scale, massing, shape, form and proportion of existing buildings. And I just want to ask whether this application, in your view, coheres to that general principle, given that there isn't a sort of similar height of building currently existing in the location. What do you think about that? And would that policy itself provide a sort of sufficient justification for refusal, because it's obviously one item within a larger policy, DM26?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Policy DM26 is the design policy, so that is the relevant policy against which this is assessed. Officer advises that the scheme taken as a whole is supported, so all the other aspects that we've heard would result in a compliant scheme. And yeah, just to note that there are other emerging tall buildings in the area, and as well as that, as the paragraph 11D from the MPPF, which we have to apply weight to development that would offer sustainable housing. But yeah, I think our advice on that is in the report.
Okay. And so in terms of what the closest existing building to this one that's taller than it, well, I don't know if you've been able to look into that one, because obviously that's why part of the reason I sent it in advance. What is the nearest building to it that is taller? Because it's 22 stories.
Castle Park View is 25 stories.
Okay.
And that's 1.2 kilometres away.
Okay.
But obviously there are emerging developments in the area as well.
Okay. So it was, there's a section of the report that's about the advice that has been given to the applicant. So it says it was advised that in order to justify a building of significantly amplified height on this site, an outstanding scheme which responds successfully to all of the aspects of policy were required. I just wondered what was the thinking behind that being advised and where that fits in with planning policy, because if we've got a significantly amplified height, isn't that in itself, shouldn't that be the reason, if we think that it's too high, shouldn't that be a reason to consider it not compliant, rather than going, oh, well, if you do these things, then it will be okay? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Well, when we're considering tall buildings, we've got the urban living SPD. And where it's a building significantly exceeds the contextual height, we're required to scrutinise all other aspects of the scheme. So hence the advice was to justify development of this height. Other aspects of the scheme need to be exemplary in order to meet that, to provide that justification. So it's drawn from the urban living SPD.
Okay. And then in regard to Historic England's comments, so what changes have been made as a result of their comments? They said, in terms of impacts on the historic environment, we believe the impacts could be minimised through careful consideration to the design and materiality of the more prominent upper section of the development. I assume that has been covered by the changes that have been made by the applicant.
Yeah, and there's the condition that's requiring further amendments through details.
Through details, yeah, okay.
So that is set out within the design section of the report. So on page 58, and then one of the conditions, I can't remember the number, but will require details of the base of where the entrance relates to the middle section of the building. So again, in urban living SPD, tall buildings are split into base, middle and top. Yeah. So yeah, the condition will require further details of enhancements of those elements.
The next question, I've got 4 more left. I'm going as quickly as I can. I was wondering whether the management strategy that's mentioned to do with safety and security, because obviously it says in the university setting, key issues in terms of safety are access to laboratories and chemicals and local high-risk locations for jumping. A full management strategy must be created. I presume that's in the conditions.
It is, yeah. So the crime reduction unit also made that comment.
Yeah, that's where that comes from.
So I will, since seeing your question, I can update that condition 35 to add a requirement to have safety measures for the roof terraces.
Cool.
Permitted.
That's helpful, thank you.
Part of the there is a management plan already requested, so that can form part of that.
Great. And then the final 3 are more around the urban living SPD. So it says in that policy, tall buildings are more likely to be supported in locations close to other tall residential or commercial clusters of tall buildings, where it can be demonstrated that a new tall building serves to raise the quality and coherence of the cluster without creating adverse impacts on the microclimate. Would you say that this scheme does cohere with that surrounding cluster, and is that of a sufficient quality for you to feel satisfied? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Does it meet that definition, if you see what I mean? Does it raise the quality and coherence of the cluster? Because clearly with the image you showed in the presentation, there is a cluster emerging in this area.
Yeah, well, it's in, as we've heard, in the Temple Quarter area, which is a regeneration area. And the emerging master plan will set the tone for development in the area. So because that area is a sustainable part of the city, and it's likely to come forward as part of, obviously, significant change and high density schemes. And yeah, so it will come forward as part of that spatial strategy.
So you feel it is coherent in regards to the wider cluster that's emerging, I assume?
Yeah.
Okay. And then is this a case where, to quote the SPD again, generally speaking, larger sites of 2 hectares and over offer the greater potential for taller buildings, as these sites are more able to set their own context than smaller sites. So this is obviously a much smaller site, which is only 0.5 hectares in terms of the building size, but slightly bigger in terms of the overall size. And it says, larger sites provide the opportunity to site tall buildings away from existing buildings and thus protect them from overshadowing and adverse wind effects. Clearly, we've got issues around wind effects, as we've just heard. Is that sufficient? Clearly, you don't think it is sufficient, the effect of wind, but also, do you feel that this site, in terms of the context, is large enough for this scale of building?
Do you mean the developable area, given all the other constraints that it has to accommodate? So
yes, I mean, it says larger sites, 2 hectares and over, and this is obviously a smaller site than that, even in totality. Sorry, I've forgotten what the overall hectares are.
It's 0.25 hectares, but the actual building, the area that can be built on is 0.15 hectares.
Okay, so it's even smaller than I thought. Okay, so it's a very small site in comparison to that policy, if you see what I mean. So if it's saying generally speaking larger sites, why is this an exception, would you say, to that general guidance that larger sites are better for taller buildings?
Yeah, I think, well, the aim of urban living in that way is to allow sufficient space around the building to provide the public realm. And obviously this site is providing that public realm. So I think it's something to be considered on its own merits.
Okay. Fine.
Again, yeah.
Finally, last one. I'm really sorry. Thank you for being so patient, everyone. Standalone, this is again quoting the SPD, standalone tall buildings, in other words, buildings that do not form part of a block and street structure, will also be discouraged. Now, we've talked about the cluster, but at present, it kind of is a standard. I mean, the consent is there for the site next door to be developed, but at present, it is a standalone tall building if we approve it, if you see what I mean. I suppose we do need to take into that wider context. But does this building form part of a block and street structure? Because I wasn't clear exactly what a block and street structure was. Do you think it conforms to that policy as well?
Well, I think it comes back to the fact that it's in the regeneration area, so obviously the whole context will change.
Yeah.
And importantly, the development framework does embed that improvement to Albert Road, where walking and cycling will be prioritised.
Yeah.
And obviously this site would be one of the first to come forward, so they have to respond to that existing context and the emerging context.
Yeah.
But as stated, we have been discussing throughout the scheme improvements to the boulevard and the new link through. So yes.
Okay, thank you so much for being patient, everyone. That's my questions done. Zoe, go ahead.
So I have a few basic questions to start with. How many flats will share a kitchen? Like, I know that's like you have the corners and stuff with the kitchens. How many units will be sharing one kitchen roughly?
There was a slide showing how many flats, how many clusters. So there were 340 of the bed spaces are included within either 4, 6 or 8 bedroom studios. I don't know how many flats that works out to be, but I think it's just under 400 bed spaces.
But how many,
No.
for every kitchen, how many people will be using it?
Oh, sorry, yeah, the cluster flats are 4, 6 or 8 beds.
Okay, and how many things like cookers or fridges will be included within those kitchens?
That I don't have as much information as that, actually. We wouldn't be able to control that in any event, but we've obviously got the size of the kitchens.
Are the white goods being included, or are the tenants expected to?
From personal experience, looking at
Yeah.
finished student accommodation, they normally are,
Be
yeah.
included. So
Yeah.
we've got potentially 8 tenants sharing a kitchen, and we don't know how many fridges or cookers there'll be. So come dinner time, everyone goes to the kitchen and there's not enough utilities for everyone to have dinner at a regular, normal dinner time. Is that a possibility?
I mean, it's something for the developers to consider, I think, but it's not something that the planning system would be able to control.
Okay. And in terms of, I noticed that in terms of like the microclimate study, it's not been fully assessed. What are the potential outcomes of the microclimate study, like good and bad?
It's something that we would need to probably have a conversation about. But normally for these type of assessments, we would expect to see mitigation being proposed. So there is some mitigation being proposed, but it's just whether there's any more mitigation needed. So things like canopies at the base of the building to deflect the wind, or landscaping, trees.
Okay. Sorry.
No, I know.
And I'm not sure if it's this one or the other one that we'll be doing today, but it's closed windows, isn't it?
Yeah.
So there'll be tempered airways. And how is that going to impact people with perhaps asthma or some of bronchitis or some kind of other like things where their breathing isn't as? Is that been factored in possibly with the equality report bit?
These student accommodation buildings normally have got mechanical ventilation, so and it's more sustainable. And obviously, the air quality issues mean that it's that's the preference, and the noise issues. Obviously, there are external amenity spaces as well, but yeah, from experience, they do tend to be non-openable windows.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to know if there was any research done on how this could affect some people with disabilities.
I haven't got that information, I'm afraid.
Has there been an equality impact assessment yet for this one? I'm not sure if I've read through it yet.
There isn't one submitted with the application. There's a social coherence strategy.
Right, okay.
And there's the equalities paragraph in the report. But I don't think it went into that much detail.
Yeah, I think that's why I was a bit confused, because usually with the reports we get people of this protected characteristic won't be affected and people of this one won't be affected. Some people of this one might be, but it's just like, we don't think there will be. So is it possible that we could get a better or more thorough equality impact assessment?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what's included within the report, we have just included our kind of standard sort of summary sort of with regard to equality issues. So obviously the public sector equality duty is engaged in the consideration and determination of this application. But just on the system itself and kind of the operation of that, I mean, I think that's probably more for the operator of the accommodation to ensure that meets kind of relevant standards and is maintained to an acceptable standard as well. So I think we've probably got limited control over that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add to that? What I would say is that clearly we've consulted with our environmental health officer as well. They have not raised any concern, which they would if there were concerns. And also, from my knowledge about mechanical ventilation systems, they usually contain filters as well, so that actually for many people with, say, asthma or disabilities in that respect, they can actually be better because it's filtered air that you're getting rather than full of pollen.
Okay, I might go across then come back. Serena, and then I'll come to Katja.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the site visit today. It was very useful. A couple of questions. I'm just wondering how this scheme fits with existing and emerging policy. So I'm just slightly concerned that it might contradict with DS3 because it's not employment-led. So I'd just like a bit of context on that. I understand there's not a master plan yet either. So it's just getting a bit of background on the fit. So as far as I understand it, with the framework, the schemes in the area are meant to be employment-led, whereas this is the other way round, it's residential-led. There doesn't seem to be much, or the employment space is limited, I'd say. So that was my first question. I've got another one, if that's all right, Chair.
Do you want to just ask it now? Because then we can get a couple. If you've only got two.
The other one is, I'm slightly concerned, or not just slightly, quite concerned, about the current lack of local shops, amenities, health services. I know that these may come on later, but it's how long that's going to take. So a couple of parts of that question is, if this is granted permission, it's a difficult question to answer, I know, when might we expect to see this development come on stream, firstly? And then second part of that question is, how long then would those students be adrift in what is frankly quite a bleak landscape at the moment without access to basic amenities? Yeah.
Thank you. So I will answer the employment issue first. And that is an issue that is described in the report. Obviously the current policy is an industrial area, and then the emerging policy is more focused on a different range of employment uses. And yeah, I think it's the conclusion in the report is that whilst we would prefer more of an employment-led mixed-use development, where the developer has said that it's not viable to include that. So the decision taken, recommendation is that with all the other benefits that the scheme will deliver, this is an area of policy that can't quite be met. So it's taken in the round. But yeah, other developments, there's the Feeder Road Unite scheme has got a block of commercial kind of light industry. The site to the south next door hasn't got as much, but there were other factors to consider there. So yeah, that's just something to weigh into the decision, is that this is one area where it doesn't quite meet the aspiration, but there are other aspirations that are met by the scheme. And then in terms of the retail offer, yeah, I think it's because it's one of the first schemes to come forward in the area. Obviously, it's will be in an area of not much to offer in terms of amenities, as in shops and places to go. But yeah, it's just in a regeneration area. I'm sure eventually there will be such uses. There'll be small-scale, local kind of shops coming forward through the regeneration area. I think in the interim, the idea is that students will be able to get deliveries, and there's space being made for deliveries on Albert Road. So that's what will happen in the interim, with the expectation that additional services will be provided in due course when the area is more developed.
Just to add, I understand that there will be facilities including a cafe and some small retail provision within the uni campus as well at Temple Quarter.
Okay. Carty, I think you were next. Yeah.
I have a few questions on this one. One of them which concerned me quite a lot was the suicide level and the suicide prevention. We know that people living 500 and something people living so much on top of one another, and I'm assuming the students will be far away from home, probably a lot of overseas students. Is there more being done about the suicide and mental health than just putting glass up so they don't kill themselves? That's the one question, but I know that that's not necessarily in the plan. But that leads me to the second question, which is the healthcare provision. I was very concerned in this particular thing where it said, well, the students can register at home. I'm quite sure quite a few of them will be from overseas, so that's not pertainable. But I also know from experience of having a child at university or a young person at university that the universities actually request them to register locally. And I looked up the two local ones, and you can't get a bus to one at all in Lawrence Hill. You can walk there for 24 minutes, which is quite long if you're sick. And the other one's the Wells Road one, which you can get 2 buses, I think. And that's also quite a long walk uphill. If you're sick, that could be an issue. So as we're having a lot of more buildings being built there with housing and student accommodation, all these things, which is not necessarily a bad thing, is there plans to make sure that we will get healthcare facilities there as well, and other health, not just a GP office, which is what we need, but also other primary health and other healthcare infrastructure? That was my first question, and that pertains to the mental health of having to live on top of people like that, far away from home. The other one was the employment and skills on page 46, which is not quite what Serena asked, which is a very good question actually, but it was about, it says, however, this is the Bristol Building and Energy Employment Skills Plan has been submitted, however, this has not been approved prior to Bristol Building submission. So there's something about the employment and skills. Is that the full employment and skills plan? Is that people that are going to be trained and working on the building sites and in the buildings, or is that, as Serena might have said, in future that we keep these areas for employment as well as living? That's the question I had there. Was there another one? There was another one. I had the wind one, but I'll leave that one out because I think that was answered. Yeah, that's about it, because of the surgery one, that one. The other one is what I always ask with these things. We need a lot of student flats at the moment. I agree. Possibly. The universities are all growing, but we also know the demographics of the world is changing. And I'm wondering, if we're building all these buildings for 50 years and 60 years, can these buildings be changed to something else? Because I don't think we're going to have students growing forever and ever and ever and ever. And which leads me to the question is, I was made to believe that the universities didn't approve this particular building. I don't know why. I don't know if that's true. That's a lot of questions.
No, that's really, sorry, just to say, it's really helpful to get all the questions in one go, because then I think it's just quicker, then we can get through them a bit quicker, I think. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I've written note of what they all were, so hopefully I get them right. So the first one is suicide prevention measures. The developer has been in discussions with the university, and whilst the university hasn't commented on the application, they have been talking to the developers. So with the condition that I've included in the recommendation to ask for the details of the suicide prevention measures, I'm certain that they will have already been designed in, so it will just be a case of those details being presented to us to assess. So it's a comment that's also been picked up by the crime reduction unit, so they made that comment on the application as well.
Because just one of the comments I'd like to make is that loneliness and isolation is extremely high amongst that particular age group of university students. The sort of, well, I know it's 16, but 18 to 24-year-olds. It's higher than in what we normally classify as the older generation that are post-retirement. And amongst university students, it's really bad when they go so far away from home. I mean, I've had experience of this, and I've been reading about it, and there's a lot of loneliness and isolation in that particular group. It's not true that they all go to university and have these lovely drunk, parties everywhere and have a great time. A huge amount of students don't. And living in this kind of condition, not good for it.
Yeah, so we will be able to assess those details when the condition response is submitted. So it would be part of the student management plan to assess other aspects of how the facility would be managed, and also those details. And in terms of the medical facilities, it's page 69 in the report where it sets out what the NHS has asked for. And the applicant's social value assessment describes where the existing facilities are, and that's Lawrence Hill Centre, Bridgeview BS1 surgery and Wells Road surgery. They're the nearest ones. Even though the NHS has stated that there's a space deficit, it also states there is capacity to take new patients. However, those comments do also state that there aren't any plans to build new facilities in the area, so we would only be able to secure a contribution if there was a set facility that was being constructed, in terms of like the mechanisms of what we can secure. But also the NHS advice is for students to remain registered with their GP at home.
That's not the advice we got. He literally got a piece of paper to tell him where to go when he didn't study in Bristol, that he had to.
I think we can't really get into the what is and isn't.
I just find it really disturbing. I'm sorry. What happens if you come from overseas, or you come from
I do agree
Nottingham
with you,
or Hull, as you said?
But I don't think we're going to get an ability to respond. I don't think there's an ability to respond to that, really, is there? Because we don't. Yeah.
Chair, sorry to interject, but I completely back up what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's my experience with student children. I'm really worried about the mental health aspects of this, so thank you for raising it.
Yeah.
Can we just refer to my colleague Jim as well? He's
Excuse me, my voice is either about to go or is going in that direction. It's a bit of a sort of a convoluted situation with the NHS at the moment. The NHS are both advising students to register with a doctor at their university, and then another bit of the NHS is advising students to stay registered at their home address if they're UK students, because they've got continuity of care and what have you from their doctor from a young age. Obviously, international students would need to register at a local surgery. Where we are with this particular application is that what the law requires, as far as planning obligations are concerned, is that any obligation has to be absolutely justified, and you have to know what you're going to spend any monies on. And where we are with this one is that the Integrated Care Board have made their comments and assumed that every single student will be registering at a local surgery, which is almost certainly not the case. There will be a proportion that will be registering. So they've assumed that every student will be registering, and they've used a formula basis then to work out how much space is required, and they've come up with a cost. It's about £300,000, I think. But because we know that not every student will be registering, we know that the figure that they're asking for is a little bit on the high side, because obviously a smaller number of students will be a smaller contribution. And we also know that they don't know what they're going to do with the money if we collect it, and that's really quite a problem, because if you look at the other obligations in Susanna's report, you'll see, for example, a transport obligation will be, £299,000 for specific works to Albert Road, Albert Boulevard. It's obvious what you're going to do with it. And what the ICB are asking for, and we do have sympathy with them, but what they're asking for is basically a pot of money to spend on something unspecified somewhere at some point in the future for which there are currently no plans. And that falls foul of Section 106 legislation, because it's not clear what the money is going to be spent on. And the actual amount that they're asking for, we don't feel is justifiable, because we know that not all students will be registering at the local surgery. The bigger picture for this part of the world is that there are discussions going on. The ICB are talking to our colleagues regarding the general development of Temple Quarter. They are at the early stages, I think, of thinking that they do need a whole new set of premises in that part of the world, because you've got all the development at Silverthorne Lane, we've got everything that's going to be coming east into St Phillips. And I think they are starting tentatively to talk with landowners, including the council, about possible sites. So I think for the future, there will be something coming into that part of the world. There is an acknowledgement that that will be needed. But we're just not at that point yet, and we're not at that point where we can secure a contribution from this site based on it's a pot of money to spend on something unspecified somewhere for which at this moment in time there are no plans. So that's really why we are where we are on this site. But I think longer term, a bigger picture, that there certainly will be health provision there. And there are, there'll be schemes coming to committee next week where health is dealt with in a slightly different way. That's the galleries scheme. And certainly I, and actually to a much greater extent Simone, spending an inordinate amount of time working as closely as we can with the health authority to work to a place where we're able to support them better to deliver health infrastructure. And that may be through strategic SIL in future. It may be through more targeted planning obligations, but we're on a journey with them really, but at the moment they're not really able to justify the contribution that they're asking for.
Thanks for that. That's really helpful, I think. So I've got Guy, I think, and then Al. Yeah, is that right? So if you could remember just to put all of your questions in one go. Oh, sorry, have you not answered one of them? Sorry, I apologise.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry, there's a couple more aspects. So yeah, the employment and skills comment from Building Bristol. It's a standard approach, so they always require a full employment and skills plan by way of a condition, and it's just to show that the developer would employ local workforce, local people to do the construction phases, and but during the operational phases it will just be down to end operators. So that, yeah, that's secured by condition. So they'll have Building Bristol will comment on that condition and approve it. And then the final point I think you had was whether it would be adaptable for future residential uses. Normally these types of buildings, because they're set out in cluster flats, technically they can be converted into residential accommodation. However, it would need to secure further planning permission, because we would want to secure affordable housing and probably additional amenity space. But in theory, yeah, the idea is that they'd be able to be converted or adapted for different residential uses.
Great. Sorry about interrupting that flow there. Guy and then Al.
Thank you, and apologies, Chair. So I had one relatively simple question, which was just in relation to the sign-off process for public art. I know that sounds like an absolutely nothing question. It's just the first development I've seen for an incredibly long time where it wasn't the first thing that got eliminated to get us to viability, and I have no clue what the process is for it now. And the other was around, the microclimate issue, which might be an absolute nothing, but I want to check it's an absolute nothing. I'm assuming this might affect, for example, the quantum of the BREEAM rating, or I'm not sure what the relevance of the microclimate is. I have literally no expectations. I have no idea what that report might yield. Could just a 2-minute masterclass in what that could potentially throw up that we might have to deal with, because I just have no idea what my expectations should be around that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So for the public art, there's a condition that will require a full public art plan to be submitted, so that will be required to be carried out by a public art producer, and it will need to have details of how the artist would be, what stage the artist would be involved, what the budget would be for public art, and the details of the maintenance and locations of the public art. So that is required by condition, and then it's assessed by the public art officer and who's part of the culture team. And then the microclimate issue. So yeah, the technical report that has been submitted, the wind microclimate study. So it's a requirement of the Urban Living SPD, which sets out how wind should be assessed within the tall buildings. So with certain aspects of, because officers take what's submitted within, it's the technical report submitted by a professional wind consultant. So there's normally areas where there are mitigation being proposed. However, there's certain questions that were thrown up from this report which officers need the full amount of time to assess because it was a fairly late submission. So it would just be something we would need to check. So it's in terms of the public realm areas, it's just whether that positioning of the tall building in the direction of the prevailing wind would be able to be mitigated to avoid severe impacts from wind.
Can I just add, in response to your question about would it have an impact on BREEAM, I think we can be pretty sure that it wouldn't, so that I think the impact is more likely external than internal to the building.
Apologies, that's what I was trying to get my head around. It's the stress to the materials involved. Is that what we're assessing?
I think it's more around the outside climate, the climate around the building.
Oh,
Wind tunnel effect. Wind tunnel effect.
Gotcha.
Speech mark.
Sorry, got there in the end. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Al's next. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I just wanted to ask for some clarification on the shadows study. I understand it's a 22-floor building, and I wanted to ask if that will have any impact on nearby homes or flats or green spaces or green spaces or like or businesses. So yeah, that's my question.
Thank you. Yeah, so the applicants have submitted a BRE daylight and sunlight report, and that assesses both the impact on neighbouring developments and the surroundings, and also the impact on light levels received within the development itself. So they've measured the window positions of neighbouring developments, acknowledging that there's not much of an existing context in terms of immediate neighbours, but the report looks at the neighbouring development on 40 to 46 Albert Road. In the report, there's a summary of the findings on page 61. So it's measured by lux levels, and it's 89% of the rooms in that neighbouring development would meet the guideline levels. And normally that we never expect 100% to be met, but because it's an urban context, it seemed to be acceptable.
Yeah, sweet. That's great. Thank you.
Great. I've had one hand from someone who's asked before, but is anyone else who's not asked questions yet want to do their questions now? Ellie, go ahead.
I don't know whether it's quite a question or a comment. I think it's a question. As usual, it feels like there's a lot of conditions to come with this, and there's a lot of sort of slightly unknown information. Are you confident that the planning team can monitor all those conditions and make sure that this goes through in a sort of timely manner? Because I realise there's a lot there, and it's kind of a shame that that's the way round that it's going, and that we're not able to get some of those things established before we get to this point. But obviously that's the way it goes. But there's, that's a concern, I suppose, that there are just so many conditions associated with what is a relatively small plot as well.
Yeah, there are a lot of conditions, but I think in terms of similar developments in the area, it's about standard. It's the same number as the neighbouring site. There's always finer details that we need to be able to approve. And yeah, we normally require them conditions to come in as well, sort of a package so that we can resource them. But yeah, that's kind of standard, really.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, just to add, as the case officer said, there are various kind of trigger points for the information and kind of when we would expect to see that. But in terms of the monitoring of it, it would be really the normal situation in that we would react to any alleged issues with any kind of breaches and just respond to that, as opposed to, being in a position where we're able to sort of proactively monitor.
Okay. Sarah's not asked any questions yet, so let's go to Sarah. So I'll come back to you, Zoe.
Just a question. We obviously, when we sort of deal with these sort of student developments, we obviously tend to kind of go in with the assumption that there aren't going to be a huge amount of cars. You know, we talk about sort of cycle spaces, cycle parking and public transport, but given the location, given the fact that it's, sort of a newer development in an area with kind of not very many local amenities at the moment, are we foreseeing any issues with higher car use than we would expect to see at student accommodation? And will there be any impacts on the sort of local area from that?
Can I just clarify, are you asking about the impacts of it being a car-free development?
Yeah, I mean, given that there aren't, a lack of maybe local shops by the time students started to move in, do we foresee any issues with people bringing cars that are not intended to be there, causing an impact on the local area or anything like that?
And we have got my colleague Will from Transport here, but I don't know if you want to come in, Will, and talk about those impacts.
Yep. So yeah, we have considered that, and we obviously realise that transport is taking a risk in permitting developments in such an area before there is that kind of infrastructure available. That's why we've calculated a series of Section 106 contributions, and those are going to be used by the Council in conjunction with Section 278 works secured by condition in order to transform the local environment for pedestrian and cycling use. And as well, the Section 106 contributions will help to extend that transformation beyond the immediate vicinity of the development. Obviously, in the short term, there is a risk of some impact. It can never be fully mitigated, but we're fairly confident that as more developments come forward, we'll be able to almost exponentially increase the mitigation funds, I suppose, that we have available to broaden that impact, and potentially looking at parking restrictions and all the things that you would expect to come along with new residential development.
Okay. I'm going to go back to Zoe and then come over to Ellie, and then if possible, if there's no other questions, I think, Richard, you haven't spoken. If you want to ask anything, then we'll move on to the debate, because we have been on to questions for quite a while.
So just wanted to follow on essentially from something Serena mentioned and technically what Sarah has also kind of touched on. So you mentioned that because there's not an awful lot of local amenities, there's going to be an interim where they are going to have to get essentially deliveries and stuff until, the business comes to them. But there's 531 flats for 0.15 hectares. And you're expecting 531 people to essentially get deliveries to this road, which actually isn't the largest of roads. Are we not foreseeing any problems of traffic and congestion if all of these residents are going to get deliveries?
Again, that would have been part of the transport modelling, so maybe we can ask Will for input on that one.
Think about that.
Yeah, we had a look at the transport modelling, and we did see that there would be a certain number of vehicle trips. However, given the nature of the site, the way that we assess student development sites is slightly different to a standard residential unit. And again, I'd just refer to the sort of wider package of contributions that we've asked the developer to make. It's again, as I said, we take contributions in order to mitigate risk that the development poses to the environment. It's also very difficult to estimate the number of deliveries that you might expect people to make. The trends that we see is an increased number of deliveries being made by more less impactful modes of travel. So, cycle deliveries, and there are lots of trials that we're seeing going on as well.
I'm speaking more about you might have somebody who does their weekly Tesco shop through the Tesco delivery, and that's going to be a big van, which I don't know how many a typical Tesco delivery van, how many households they can fit in one, but if they're all doing it, and you also got the the Deliveroo's and the Just Eats and the Uber Eats on top of that. It's not just fast food. It's not just supermarket shops. It's also things like Amazon purchases and stuff like that. That's a lot of deliveries to come to a really small plot of land. That's just what I'm considering. Have you considered all the different types of deliveries? And the different kind of vehicles that each of them have?
As I say, the trends that we're seeing are that those sorts of deliveries are being made by different modes to how they were. But what we also see across a number of developments in a number of precedents outside Bristol is that the operators, the companies that handle those deliveries, Tesco and Amazon, they often consolidate those deliveries themselves into a smaller number of less frequent deliveries. And servicing and deliveries has been a consideration, as it always is, which is why, as part of the 278 works, we've asked the developer to set back their building line in order to create space for on-street loading capacity that doesn't currently exist. And that capacity is set back from the carriageway. And we've got sort of outline plans showing what that capacity will look like. We've also got a fairly substantial setback at the front of the building to enable cycle deliveries to take place away from that vehicle area, so trying to separate as much as possible the different modes of traffic that you might expect to be making deliveries. Again, there are certain risks associated with permitting development in an area that doesn't currently or doesn't yet have the amenities that you'd expect. But again, we tried to mitigate that risk to the greatest extent possible, and it is unfortunately very difficult to fully anticipate the exact impact that deliveries are going to make, because there's so little data showing what that impact might be, per unit. So yeah.
Thank you.
Would it be worth saying as well that compared with the existing transport movements, it would be an improvement?
Okay, I think I had Ellie left.
Yes, that's right.
Just one very small point, and then you won't hear again from me for this item. The current of what's currently around, but as we discussed today, there are several other buildings that are going to go up that are student accommodation. Have we factored in how the
how obviously we can't factor that in for this development, but would you expect this development to comply with that master plan? Is that kind of where it's sitting, if you like? It's a timing thing as well, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good question. So what we've got in place at the moment is the Temple Quarter Spatial Framework, which dates back a few years now, but then more recently there's been the Temple Quarter Development Framework, which was approved last year. And even though it's quite high level, it sets out the aims for the area, and it does include I guess, a bit more detail about the requirements of Albert Road being a boulevard and the flood defence. It doesn't go into much detail about design of buildings or heights, but it does talk about the aspirations for the area in terms of the types of uses that would be, it relates to mainly St Philip's Marsh, this area. But the actual master plan that is envisaged to eventually become an SPD, it's been worked on this year and to be hopefully adopted next year.
Okay. I think we might have got to the end of the questions there, unless there's any really burning ones. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the debate. I again just want to start by saying I'm just a bit disappointed that we haven't got the guidance like a master plan, something that provides sort of potentially useful policy around the height of the development. Because I think that the height, I mean, obviously I've asked a lot of questions about the height. I would say that's one of my primary concerns about this whole area, to be honest, the height of the buildings. And I understand that on development control, we are focused on interpreting policy and making decisions on planning applications, but it is quite frustrating that there isn't really something that we can point to and say, this is how high a building should be in this area. This is the kind of sort of way that we want this area to look. It doesn't feel like we've quite got there with this. So that's what I'd start by saying. I've got other stuff to say, but I've got other hands up and I don't want to keep talking. So I've got Guy and then Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I've got a slightly croaky voice, but I'll do my best. I do need to mention this. So my own ward, Cottam, is where the university, what people traditionally think of as the university campus is really based, that part of the city. And over the last decade or so, the residents have seen the number of HMOs, the housing multiple occupation, shared houses go from 5% to 10% to 15% to 20% to about a quarter. Now, it went completely out of control. About 40% of the population of my ward are now students. There is horrendous exploitation by landlords. There was no contribution to the NHS. There was no SIL for infrastructure. There was no Section 106 to provide transport solutions, or dare I say anything to help with the roughly tripling of the waste demand produced in that ward. So I'm quite pleased to see that some of these things are now being thought of when a solution actually comes along. In terms of the sort of questions that were raised around the GP surgery, or the NHS draw, as it were. And I did want to flag, I don't know about anyone else, an awful lot of the services I get from my GP are provided through their website or online. And so this is someone who's on a shared care agreement as well. If I was to move, I would stay with my GP that I've got currently for as long as humanly possible rather than renegotiate that. And it's not to say that people shouldn't be able to register with a different GP when they come to uni, but should we proceed according to the assumption that every single student will want to? No. And I don't think this authority could hold itself to be reasonable or proportionate if we were to ask for £250,000 for services that we have no knowledge of how they'll be provided. And there doesn't seem to be any intention to provide them in the short term. In terms of there not being any infrastructure around it, I hate to say it, this to me is what brownfield development looks like. There won't be infrastructure to begin with. The headcount will bring it. The chimney pots will bring the infrastructure and the services and the shops and everything else around it. I would really encourage colleagues to think along these lines. This is 1/4 of a hectare to provide the equivalent of 212 houses without the loss of any green space that's viable in terms of its planning obligations. The local councillors are in favour and not a single objection from a member of the public. If this isn't good, I don't know what good looks like. This isn't the first time we've seen something like this from this developer as well. I want to say credit where credit's due. I think the officer has done a superb job at preparing this application, but unless I've missed something dramatic, which is why I was kind of curious at the idea that the wind might blow the thing over, but I'm glad to hear that's not the case, then I'll be voting in favour. Thanks.
Thanks, Guy. Richard?
Chairman, it is quite scary when I seem to agree with Councillor Portney quite a number of occasions. Obviously, my colleagues had various questions, and it's only right and proper that they're answered to your satisfaction, because clearly our job here this evening, student accommodation, as we require here in policy terms, it also sought to provide some low low-cost employment use to local people. That was good. It also contributed significantly to the flood prevention schemes we had. It had practically, I think there was one objection. And as Guy has said, we haven't even seen that. We had the local community and the ward councillors in support. And it does seem ludicrous if we ignore that example. In my view, Cubics, the applicant, is to be congratulated. They came forward with a positive, very good scheme which meets local student housing need, provides below-cost employment use, increases the public realm in an imaginative way, increases tree planting, has unbelievably huge BNG. I don't think I've ever determined one bigger, over 3,400% by memory serves, improved transport, flood prevention. We're taking the witness assessment into effect, of course, through delegating to the officers. So I would say this is a good scheme. It's worthy of our support. Please back it.
Thank you, Richard. Zoe.
So I'd just like to apparently apologise to Councillor Richard and Councillor Poultney and the applicants. If it appeared that by my questioning it seemed that I was not going to vote in favour, I was assuming that our positions here was to ask questions to quell any doubts, and then we can vote mindfully. I'm probably going to vote for this application, and I'm sorry to the presenting officer and others if it appeared that I was just asking questions for the sake of it. I just genuinely wanted to make sure that we covered all our bases.
Okay, Katia, go ahead.
I wanted to say the same. I'll probably be voting for this. I still do have strong reservations, though, around the medical facilities. It's all very well being registered. If you're registered in Nottingham and you get sick in Bristol, you have to go to a doctor in Bristol. You can't drive all the way to Nottingham. So I'm really pleased to hear that there is negotiations going on with the NHS. I do understand the complications of the law on this, and obviously something us politicians should be really pushing for like crazy, because on my door knocking sessions or my sessions with my residents, it is one of the things of new developments that comes up time and time again. They don't have enough medical facilities. We don't have enough medical facilities. And so, while it might not be in this particular area, because obviously the idea that we don't, the one thing I do have to push back on, though, is the idea that we don't have any complaints about this. Nobody lives around there, so obviously we're not going to get any complaints. So I take that very much into consideration. And I do take your point very strongly, and that is something that does frustrate me. Not so much on the heights of the buildings. I'm a bit agnostic about high buildings. I don't know whether I believe they're good or a bad thing at the moment. I'm sort of in between. But I do think that this building standards aren't there yet, and this building is going ahead before them. So that's all a bit, but I do understand why, and so I will be voting for this. It's not something against the developer in particular. And the third thing, sorry, I'm going on, the mental health aspects of living on so top of one another, so far from home, and maybe those first few years when the stuff around it is not there yet. We really do hope that the student loans company, whoever does it, will do something positive before there's problems, so that they don't have suicides and not just put glass buildings so they don't throw themselves off. Thank you.
Yeah, Ellie, go ahead.
So I want to echo some of that, but also bear in mind that there will be a campus, or that these students will be going to a campus. This isn't where they're going to be spending 24 hours of their day. And as somebody who is doing a part-time course at the moment, going to campus is a change of scene. It's what you do. It's it's where you can do your shopping to an and various things like that. So I am, obviously it's going to be challenging, I think, for those early students until the area kind of comes into its own. And it is a shame that there isn't a master plan, kind of driving the area as well yet. But I mean, I'm in agreement, which I think we all are generally. The fact that our questions didn't raise any major issues, I think, shows that we recognise that this is suitable for the area, that the developer has, like you said, 50% of the site is effectively being lost by them. Yeah. And there's various improvements and requirements, and you've done a lot of negotiation. So, yeah, I mean, I think reservations aside, it is what it is. And yeah, I mean, I will be voting for it as well. I think it's the other point I suppose I wanted to make is somebody's got to jump first. And, and this is what's happening here. We can't, you can't line all your ducks up and have everybody starting at the same place at the same time. So there's always going to be somebody that's got to jump first. Okay. In a development context, yes. Not an off the roof context.
Thanks for clarifying those comments, Councillor Freeman. Councillor, Al, and then Serena.
I would just like to add that in my ward I get loads and loads of complaints about HMOs, and I'm glad when I see these new student developments, because it actually frees up family homes for families, and it makes sure these students are in one concentrated place, and that attracts extra investment and business and new shops and new companies, and I think overall that's extremely healthy for our city. So yeah, I'm quite glad that this application has come through, and I'd just like to say that the developers have done an excellent job in putting this application together. So yeah, thank you.
Go on, Serena.
I think it is right and proper, having said all that, to be a bit of a devil's advocate, that we do demand the best. So this is the first of one of these buildings in this area to go first, and someone has to go first, as Councillor Ellie said. But there's nothing wrong with us demanding the very best and challenging developers who come to our city to provide excellent design. I think we need to bear that in mind. Having said that, I can see there are lots of merits to the scheme. The public realm contributions are very good, especially the very important flood defence, the contributions to the boulevard, greenway, etc. But I think we always have to ask this question, this is what I always ask myself, is what would future Bristolians standing on that very site in 100 years' time have to say? So would they be proud of the decisions we make today? Or would they look around and say, and scratch their heads and say, what on earth were they thinking? So I'm very glad to see and reassured that there's a condition that's demanding a bit extra on the design, because at the moment I don't think it's quite there. I don't think it's quite good enough. I am worried about the height. I am worried about a tendency across the city with PBSA, that's student accommodation, to pile them high and house them cheap. I can't think of a better way of putting it. And today I was struck by the quite bleak surroundings at the moment. But I'm bearing in mind that that will change, that there is a university campus coming on board. I'm hoping those things will happen quite quickly, that it is going to be a vibrant area. Having said that, I think for the surrounding area, I would like to see more employment-led development in the future, which is policy compliant. And I hope it's all going to come together and be a success. But I think, as I say, the flood risk mitigation and that part of the scheme is really good. The east-west connection is really good, so I will be voting for it. But I want us to push for better design. I want us to be able to challenge, because that's our job. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena. Guy.
Thank you, Chair. No, it was just to say, excuse me. I just want to put colleagues' minds at ease if it's necessary. Absolutely, our job here is to question and to query and to ask those sorts of questions. And for what it's worth, the concern that sits in the back of my head around all of this is that if I owned a quarter of an acre near this site that was currently in use as employment land, I would be starting to wonder, am I making the most lucrative use of this footprint? And I think we will need to be vigilant against the loss of employment space in this area moving forward, and that is probably the biggest risk of this development at this point. Yeah, so just to say that, and also if I have the feeling the debate is starting to draw to a close, if the chair was seeking a second as you move the officer's recommendation, I'd be more than happy to.
Thanks. Sarah, do you want to? Yeah, you haven't said anything.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief. I always make this mistake of sort of putting my hand up sort of towards the end, and then everyone takes the good points. Just to say, I think it's a really refreshing change in planning to be looking at an application from the perspective of it's good, how can our scrutiny make it better, rather than this is awful, please don't ever build this in our city. So this is a really a plea to developers that this is the sort of standard that we want. We want things that are well thought out, that are considered for the area, that are within context of other developments and the change of our city. And I'm really pleased actually to see that we haven't got with this development the sort of quite anti-student backlash that we have seen with some other developments. I understand that part of it is because of the location, that there aren't sort of houses and things like that in the area to sort of take that. But, we don't have the control in this committee, or really in so much in the council, to kind of put limits on the expansions of the universities. But what we can do is look at how our planning can mitigate that and build good student accommodation, good places that give students a really good experience of Bristol, because that's what we want. We want them to love it here and enjoy it and stay on. And I think this development is very much a part of that, while also creating space that isn't taking up residential space, turning potentially family homes into HMOs. So I think it's a very easy scheme to actually come to a decision on with this one, despite scrutiny is an important part of any development that comes, any application that comes here. But this is, I think, a very refreshing change from some of the ones that we've had. So yes, I will be voting in favour of it.
Thank you. I'll just conclude by saying my concerns are mainly around height. Like Serena said, I think about Bristol and I think about how I see it in my head, and this might be different for different people, but I don't see us as Birmingham, I don't see us as Manchester, I don't see us as London, I don't see us as a city that has a large number of 20-plus storey buildings. And so when I see an image of what it might look like, similar to what you were saying, Serena, about 100 years in the future, I do wonder whether we're on the right track. That being said, I can only echo what everyone said, it seems like an exemplary development to me. I'm particularly keen on the fact that you've done a lot of work around the East-West link. I also think that the actual infrastructure for cycling that you've committed to, over 500k of contributions is good development. And I've tried cycling down Albert Road before, and it's not a nice environment at the moment. It's incredibly hostile. Just while we were visiting earlier, someone stopped sort of to pause at the side of the road, and someone just overtook at a really high speed, and it's a very hostile environment for pedestrians. So I'm really pleased that this is something that is being included as part of this application. And yeah, reservations about height, reservations about the fact we haven't got a master plan, all in mind, we've got to support this, I think. So I will move the officer recommendation and seek another committee member to second it. I think you've already put your name on that, have you, Guy? Okay. Who? Richard? Are you seconding?
Four.
Sorry?
4.
Are you seconding it?
I'll second it.
Yeah, no, we're not quite on the voting stage yet, but we'll get there now. Yeah. So I'm just going to bring up my randomizer thing that allows us to vote in a random order. So we'll just go around, just say if you're in favour or against the officer recommendation. Sorry. First of all, Councillor Al McGroby.
I'll be voting for. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eddy.
4.
Councillor Hornshin.
4.
Councillor Pulteney?
4.
Councillor Breyer? That's me. 4. Councillor Classic?
4.
Councillor Peat?
4.
Councillor Ralston?
4.
And Councillor Freeman.
4.
Thank you very much. That is obviously approved. Thank you for all your time. Thank you to the members of the public and for the applicants for your time, and for Yasin as well as the local councillor for turning up and making representations. We'll take a 10-minute break. We have had some advice to take slightly more breaks in his meeting, so if we come back at, yes, 1:45, 7:45. Thanks, everyone.
This is the building that used to be Avon House, isn't it? Premier Inn?
I don't know actually.
If it is, it's the one I used to work at.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it was Avon House.
Was it Avon House?
Was it? Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Welcome back to the DCA committee. We are going to take the next set of public forum, which is on the application Premier Inn, the Haymarket. So if, obviously just to remind you, just to summarise your statement and take no longer than a minute. So the first statement we have is B1, which is from Craig O'Brien. Is Craig here? Yes, I can see him standing up.
Good evening, councillors. So good evening. Last March, committee members approved Olympian's application for the long-awaited transformation of the Premier Inn site. This evening, members are being asked solely to consider the limited changes proposed in this Section 73 application, not to revisit that previous decision and the principle of development, of course. Your officers support this application with no objections from consultees. The proposed changes are largely internal. Any external changes are very modest with no changes to height or massing. The changes proposed include additional smoke shafts required by more recent fire regulations. These smoke shafts have reduced the size of the shared kitchen/diners on each floor, making them much less usable. So instead we propose to use those spaces as studios and relocate that space, dedicating the entire 16th and 17th floors to much larger shared spaces, including kitchens for communal dining. HSE have also agreed to this change. We hope you can support your officers and allow Olympian to carry on building these much needed homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Statement B2 is Oliver de Alanja, or sorry, I've got your name wrong.
Good evening, councillors. Within weeks of members approving our application to transform the Premier Inn site, we started demolition. Our redevelopment will see 2/3 of the site transformed into public open space. Our scheme, which includes 132 co-living homes, was supported by 65 people with direct experience of Bristol's housing crisis. The changes proposed would increase the number of homes to 150. I'm really pleased 20% of these will be affordable homes at LHA rates. These bright and fully equipped co-living studios, which include their own kitchens, are larger than others in Bristol and exceed the Greater London Authority's space guidance. These homes are typically 25% cheaper than renting a one-bedroom flat. Our residents would also have a range of shared social spaces, including an amazing 17-storey roof terrace. These community spaces are great for bringing people together and creating communities. We're extremely keen to continue cracking on with the demolition and bring these much-needed homes to Bristol. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. We do have another statement, B3, but I think Peter Ellis is not attending today. As I can't see him anywhere, because I know who he is. So without further ado, let's move on to the officer presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Good. Yes, as has just been outlined to you, last March an application came to committee for a mixed-use development on the Premier Inn site, delivering student accommodation and co-living in essentially 2 blocks. It was eventually approved in May after the completion of a Section 106 agreement, and this application is for a variation of that approved scheme. So I'm sure you all know where the site is, but that's what was there. The demolition work has started. You may well have seen it walking past, but the building is still there. It's probably worth me just spending a little bit of time explaining the format of the application. I don't know how familiar members are with Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act. I'm sure me being very nerdy, I know it reasonably well. I'm sure members that are not as familiar, but essentially what Section 73 does is allow applications for changes to conditions. As we and other authorities include a condition which requires approval of the plans, the applicant can apply to vary that condition and hence vary the plans. In the guidance, it refers to or used to refer to, it doesn't really say it anymore, about making minor changes to schemes. Recent case law has basically said that there's no specific requirement for changes to be minor within the law, and therefore you can make any changes to the application as long as it does not impact on the operative part of the permission. The operative part of the permission being the description of development. So that offers quite a lot of scope for changes within the scheme. Also mention that the effect of a grant of permission under Section 73 or a refusal of a permission under Section 73 has no impact on the previous permission. So if this is granted today, the developers will have two permissions and they can build out either. If it's refused today, then the previous permission still stands. So what we're being asked to consider is the effect of the changes to the scheme that the applicant have put through, changes to conditions and changes to the approved plans. And we can only consider the effect of those against whether or not they comply with planning policy and other material considerations. As has been outlined, we cannot revisit the principle of development. I had a long think about how to do this, because it's a bit like a sort of spot the difference game, trying to work out the differences between the two schemes. So I haven't tried to cover everything in my presentation. I've just tried to put in a few slides which hopefully illustrate the main points for you. The full list of changes are in the report, and if members are interested, they can look through that. But hopefully this sort of outlines the main changes for you. So that's the approved basement plan, and that's the revised basement plan. The basement is larger and includes some sort of additional amenity space. There's a gym in the basement plus a bit more amenity space. That's what's outlined in blue and orange. The basement largely uses the existing structure, but there needed to be some changes to the basement because of impact on the road network and making sure that the road network was safe and that sort of thing. So those are changes to the basement. Changes to the first floor. I probably should just sort of set out the two buildings. The building that's sort of outlined in orange is the co-living block, and the blue building is the student accommodation. So that's the approved scheme, and that's the revised scheme. And just probably to illustrate the main changes on this floor, there's an image there. The ground floor of the co-living block has been sort of tweaked to reduce the amount of curved glass needed. There's some additional plant on the ground floor, and there's an illustration there of what that's going to look like. Mezzanine floor, there's some mezzanine accommodation for the student block, which has been sort of tweaked and rearranged a little bit, but is pretty much the same amount of floor space. And then up to the first floor, and this is where the residential accommodation starts. The student accommodation hasn't changed, so there's no impact in terms of the arrangement of the student accommodation. First floor upwards, the issue is with the co-living block, and I hope this slide probably explains what those changes are. So you've got three images there. On the left-hand side is the scheme that was originally approved, and what this shows is that basically the accommodation was clustered around a shared amenity provision per floor. The way it was arranged, it was sort of two floors of amenity provision to be shared amongst two floors of accommodation, but each floor would have had some amenity and a balcony every other floor. The middle slide is what they've described as design development. This is the impact of the additional fire regulations requirements. So that eats into that sort of amenity space, and therefore reduces the amount of amenity space that can be provided. And then the the drawing on the right is the revised scheme, and as explained, what they've done is remove the amenity space from each floor, remove the balcony, and replace that with additional accommodation. So we get an additional 18 units as a result of this. That's what the amenity space would have looked like. As I say, that sort of hopefully sort of explains the layout a little bit, but the proposal is to remove this. And what we get instead is dedicated amenity on the top 2 floors of the co-living block. So you probably can't see this, but there's sort of rooms laid out as sort of shared kitchen, workspace, a yoga studio, those sort of things. And then up to the top floor, which has got some external amenity spaces as part of the offer. Probably just worth pausing there to mention the overall provision of internal amenity space. You will see in the update sheet there's a correction in the loss of internal amenity space from the original report. It was stated it was around 300 square metres. Actually, with some tweaking to the design and some clarification, it comes down to about 220 square metres that has been lost. Yeah, it's overall, the original scheme had about 1,450 odd square metres of internal amenity, and now we're down to just over 1,200. So that's the internal alterations. Again, the external alterations. So essentially, the 2 main things that I think will be noticeable are the removal of balconies and the changes to the windows. So that's the removal of balconies essentially. Changes to the windows to make those windows openable for purge ventilation. Shown in the left is the approved scheme, the right is the revised scheme, and that gives us that elevation. No, that doesn't. That's the approved elevation. Sorry, and that's the revised elevation. The reason it looks slightly bigger is just my my lack of skill with PowerPoint, not because it is actually any bigger. The scale is exactly the same. And there's some CGI illustrations to show those differences. I've included the other elevations in the pack, but in the presentation, sorry, but essentially the main changes are to windows. So I didn't try and illustrate everything. So that's the proposed west elevation, proposed south elevation, and the proposed north elevation. A couple of things just to add. Hopefully all members have seen the amendment sheet, which has got a couple of additional comments on, one from a member of the public and one from the HSE, including an additional objection from a member of the public. It mentions in that we have received a revised noise report that has been reviewed by our pollution control officer, who's content with its recommendations, and has recommended a condition for compliance with that report. So we'll be adding an additional condition to deal with that. There's also a slight tweak to the section 106, which is in the report. The applicant has agreed to pay an additional £1,980 towards monitoring of the travel plan as a result of the additional accommodation that's been provided. So the previous approved scheme, there was the decision was made on the basis of the benefits outweighing the harm, and you'll see in section 16, sorry, of my report, I've outlined those harms and those benefits. So the question really before you is as a result of these changes to the scheme, are there additional harms, and do the benefits still outweigh those harms? I think our view is that there's a marginal increase in harm in terms of the setting of listed buildings, but it is very marginal. It's just from a slightly more cluttered design, and the benefits, like we've seen earlier, are fairly substantial. So we're comfortable that the previous recommendations still stand and have recommended the scheme for approval. Subject to completion of the 106, and we're also asking for delegated authority to complete the list of conditions. Because it's a Section 73 application, essentially we are tied to the conditions that were originally put on the permission unless they've been either discharged or need to be updated as a result of the changes to the scheme. So the list of conditions that I've put in the report won't change very much, but we will need to add 2 additional conditions. One to do with the noise report, as I've already mentioned, and another one to do with SUDS. We're just having a discussion with Wessex Water about the SUDS condition and making sure that they are comfortable with that. So there will be a couple of extra conditions. But other than that, the final list of conditions will look very much like what's in the report. So, yeah, thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Lewis. I saw Guy, Richard and Zoe, actually, in that order. So we're moving to questions. Sorry, I should say that. Any questions you want to ask or clarifications?
Thanks. I'll the same again, do them all at once and then...
If possible, but...
Sure.
Yeah.
So, just for clarification, under Section 73, and I'm fairly sure you've answered this, I just want to make sure I'm absolutely right on this. If, for example, one felt that the original was finely balanced and that the new application was, on balance, slightly more harmful, that would be a valid reason for refusal.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. And it was all 3 at once.
Okay.
Is purge ventilation what it sounds like? And the other...
I think you should clarify that one. What do you mean?
Could you clarify what purge ventilation is and why it's necessary? And finally, I just want to ask a question that actually emerged from the previous officer's report around the urban living SPD, where it stated, or it specifically noted, obviously the urban living SPD doesn't include student accommodation, just in the same way it also doesn't include co-living, as this one doesn't include co-living, but it does set a rule of thumb to set expectations of 5 square metres private outdoor amenity space per 1 2-bedroom dwelling with an extra 1 square metre for each additional occupant. And I was wondering how that applied to the co-living space in this case. Thanks.
Answer to your first question, is Section 73, I suppose the short answer is yes. You do have to make an assessment again in terms of do the benefits still outweigh the harm. But yeah, you have to be mindful that there is an extant planning permission on the site, and they can just go ahead and build what they've got permission for, which is obviously material to the consideration. Second question was about purge ventilation. So purge ventilation is... The scheme will be mechanically ventilated, so for normal comfort, you won't need or want to open your window. You'll have mechanical ventilation, which will make the rooms comfortable. Purge ventilation means that if there is, if it gets particularly hot or whatever, and there's a need to purge the building of hot air, the windows can open and just allow that to so the building doesn't overheat, essentially. So it won't be used as a regular thing at all. And the final thing, the outdoor amenity space. The simple answer is we don't apply that standard to co-living because the nature of co-living is different. As I set out in the report, we are preparing a SPD which deals with co-living. That will include a different standard for outdoor amenity space as part of the SPD, outdoor co-living is sort of hit us before we have a policy in place to deal with it, basically. So we are trying to sort of fit the co-living provision into these, or trying to assess it on the basis of which of the existing policies we think are most relevant. But because of the specific nature of co-living, having a requirement for 5 square metres per person wouldn't be a reasonable request in our view.
Yeah, go on quickly.
Very quick follow-up. So just for clarity though, given 5 square metres plus an additional 1 per occupant for students, obviously co-living could be older people, younger people, families. Is the expectation that the space standard would be lower or higher?
So I think the 5 square metres is for C3 accommodation. It's for self-contained dwelling units. So yeah, we use it as guidance for students, but it's not sort of directed necessarily for PBSA. For co-living, I would have to double check, but in terms of the standards, but the standards are not sort of not necessarily for private amenity space. It's about having sort of communal outdoor amenity space as part of co-living schemes. I know that doesn't quite answer your question, but yeah, I would have to. We haven't got a standard at the moment. Is basically where we are.
Apologies, I will shut up after this, I promise. Sorry, no, it was simply in terms of the number of anticipated occupants of the building. What do you get if you divide the roof space, which is the remaining amenity space? Sorry, the amenity space by the number of people. Is it more or less than 5 square metres per person?
Oh, I see. It would be less than 5 square metres per person.
Sorry, just to add a paragraph 12.7, there is some commentary which has been included in terms of the London plan. So just obviously they are like ahead of us in terms of setting those standards, but I don't know if that helps at all in just understanding that a bit more.
Thanks. Okay, I think I had Richard and Zoe.
As Mr. O'Brien remarked, in my judgment, and the officers, this is quite a modest proposal, so I concur with that, and hopefully it doesn't excessively detain us, although in my experience, my hopes that DC committee have sometimes been dashed. There is one issue that Lewis mentioned, which I'm a bit perplexed about. Lewis, you said that even if committee was minded to refuse this application, the original consent remained in force. Now, if the Health and Safety Executive is particularly pursuing this issue about improved fire safety regulations, presumably they wouldn't be happy to be implemented unless that was incorporated.
Yeah, it's an interesting one with the Health and Safety Executive because, frankly, their regulations change. I was going to say with the wind. That's being a bit flippant, but change on a very regular basis. And yeah, we've seen an awful lot of schemes come back to us because there needs to be internal amendments to deal with those changes. What happens is, once a scheme has got planning permission, there's a second. They get a second bite at it, essentially, where they get to review the sort of detailed fire compliance. Now, as far as I can see, this scheme could comply with the fire regulations, but with internal alterations. But those internal alterations wouldn't need planning permission on their own. Whether the scheme then becomes unviable or is undesirable for other reasons is another issue. But yes, on the face of it, the scheme as approved without internal alterations would fail the fire regs and therefore would not meet the requirements of the HSE.
Okay, Zoe.
I'm just going to quick fire my questions so then you don't have to hear from me until the next item. So Bristol Core Strategy 18 emphasises suitable internal space for residents, but with the reduction of the 225 square metres in the internal amenity, as well as the removal of balconies, how do you think residents are going to be able to cope with the kind of that loss of amenity in terms of cooking, socialising, relaxing? And do you feel that the areas might become overcrowded and potentially create fire hazards that way? Next question is, I've lost it now. Just answer that one then.
I will do my best to answer that one. Yes, I mean the policy requirement, the BSC 18 policy requirement is that that residents are provided with adequate space to meet sort of their daily needs. Again, I'll come back to the point that we haven't really got very much guidance on this. We are working on guidance, and we have looked at the guidance in the London Plan as for the guidance that we're working on. In terms of internal amenity space, just in terms of the amount that's provided, this scheme does comply with the London Plan, and whilst our SPD is at early stages, it would comply with our SPD in terms of the amount of space that's provided, and is relatively sort of, compared to other schemes that have been approved within the city, is relatively well provided for amenity space, both within sort of private dwellings and communal amenity space. So I think the answer to the question is, on the basis of the best guidance we have available, that the scheme would be provided with adequate amenity.
Okay, just something I asked with the previous item is how many residents will be using it, like per kitchen, how many residents are expected to use it in the building?
So, as I say, the student accommodation isn't changing, so I haven't got that information to hand. I think it was around about 10 units per kitchen, which is sort of, I mean, it's along the lines of other student accommodation we've approved. For the co-living, each studio has its own cooking area, plus there's additional sort of communal cooking areas both on the ground floor and I think on one of the two top floors anyway. So there'll be an opportunity for sort of communal cooking, but each studio has its own cooking area.
And I appreciate you won't know this, but again, it's just what I asked in the last one, and if you do have the answers, that would be great. Are the white goods provided, and do you know how many like fridges, cookers, and so forth is going to be in each kitchen?
Simple answer is no. I mean, it will be managed accommodation, so yeah, it will be a fully furnished development. But in terms of the number of white goods, etc., I don't know, I'm afraid.
So there's a potential that it could just be like 2 cookers, 2 fridges for 10 people?
For the student accommodation, yes. I mean, I haven't got that information. So.
Okay, cheers.
Okay, any other questions, or should we move on to the debate? Let's move on to the debate then. So has anyone got anything they want to raise? Richard, go ahead.
Not really much to say. The original consent was very overwhelming on the balance of actually significant balance of benefits for the scheme. I do believe this is quite a modest proposal, and as the officer assesses it, is policy compliant, it wouldn't actually cause us a difficulty. So clearly, commercially, and also with their legal requirement, it makes sense, in my view, to actually, for committees to support it, I would be happy to support it myself.
Thank you, Richard. Any other comments anyone wants to make? Serena, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not very impressed with this. I think it's a very disingenuous attempt to squeeze in 18 more units. I'm really concerned that all the amenity space is going to be on the top floors. So everyone is going to have to make their way up to those floors, and I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. For amenity space, there's going to be nothing on individual floors, which is going to be very isolating. So I think this is quite a major change. I don't think this is minor, and I'm not happy. Thank you.
Okay, gotcha.
I know, as Serena said, they're changing. How many was it? I said 132 to 150, so that's quite a lot of numbers of things. So it's not just a small alteration. I'm really worried about the amenity spaces. I've been doing a lot of research recently into HMOs, house shares, co-op living, all that kind of thing. And while there has been some positive feedback from very young people, so students and young professionals who choose to live together, that is usually could be a good experience, sometimes not, sometimes is. But once you get past a certain age, in your early 20s, it becomes a very fraudful way of living. It's what they call forced sharing, and people. And here you're even trying to pack even more people into this and making big changes to it. And I do think we really, really need to get working on better space standards or standards for this kind of living. So I'm mindful to say a no to this change. I'm sorry.
Okay. Zoe, and then I'll come back to Richard.
I think what makes me feel slightly better about potentially voting no about this is that because it's already got an application and I quite actually like the original application, I'm not just saying no to an entire block of housing. It's still going to be there. We're still going to have 133 something like that, 132 new new homes available. So that makes me feel like I'm not saying no to new housing, but I do agree with Katya's and Serena's points. I think the loss of amenity is huge. I mean, balconies arguably aren't essential, but they were a real selling point of the property. I think the kitchens, there's a huge risk that the kitchens are going to become overcrowded. Then you're going to have, potentially students with lots of not all students, no, only one of the buildings is students, but it's just going to be overcrowded, loss of amenity. We haven't even talked about the disability impact either of, yes, there probably will be an elevator to the top floor, but is it really fair to make someone with a disability potentially have to go up an elevator just to the top floor just to be able to make their dinner? So I'm probably not going to vote for this one. And I do apologise, but I look forward to, if this one doesn't pass, I do look forward to the original proposal.
Okay, thanks. Richard and then Guy.
Very briefly, two things. I would have thought, even if it's a marginal consequence of the changes, there's an increase to the number of Bristolians and visitors who can actually be accommodated was a good thing. I thought we had a housing crisis in Bristol, but perhaps I'm wrong, of course. The other issue, I actually do think we should bear in mind the applicant has got on and is doing things. We know from our own information that Bristol's one of the 10 most expensive cities in the world to actually develop homes and property in. And this applicant has got a planning consent last March, as we heard from Lewis. The final section 106 came through in May. They've actually got on. I've heard and seen positive demolition work, etc. So this isn't like the, for example, the St Mary Laporte scheme, which I believe we supported over 4 years ago, and nothing's happened. This is a scheme where we're actually seeing progress day by day, week by week, and actually if we turn down what in my view is a very minimal proposal, frankly we risk actually delaying that positive development.
Thank you. Guy?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to apologise. I'm slightly worried that the consensus has come to an end, but hopefully we'll get back to it. If one regards the original as finely balanced, and the decision record of the when this was granted refers to it as finely balanced, it was a split committee decision, recognising that the heritage harm was balanced by the provision of the bed spaces, in effect. Now, I have to admit, I'm not massively familiar with co-living as a concept. I lived in student accommodation for a very long time, though, and I've lived in shared housing a lot. And I remember the point where space standards started to be eroded. We went from 4 to 5 people sharing a flat with shared facility to 6, 7. And the point where I'd say this used to be what was called a student accommodation warden or halls monitor back in the day, the point at which it started to become genuinely difficult to manage, where there would become clashes of personality over the course of a year that would create resentment around the amount of resource all the people living there to share. The queue for the fridge and a queue for the bathroom and a queue for the... How do you maintain a relationship when space standards are eroded to that extent? I worry about a point where someone, as Councillor Pete, I think it was, said, has to go get in a lift to go and use a kitchen. The loss of the balconies, which might seem like a minor thing, I think is huge in some ways. It's one thing to say that the building will be mechanically ventilated. People won't have to open windows to enjoy a set temperature. I've lived in buildings where you weren't allowed to open those windows, and you weren't able to open those windows irrespective of the temperature unless you reached a point where it was, the expression that used to be used was too hot to breathe before you were allowed to open those windows. The loss of those balconies, I think, creates a really serious risk. What I'm saying is, a lot of these changes, and I'm particularly worried about the space standards, and frankly, the idea that someone might be stuck in what is quite a small space, and the only retreat from it is a communal area, potentially on a different floor that they share with a significant number of other people, or at least they can get in the lift and go to the roof. If it gets too hot and too noisy, the effect of this on the mental health of the people that live in this building, I'm genuinely quite concerned about. And on that basis, I think the balance is tilted. However, I want to bend over backwards to give this developer the benefit of the doubt. I think that's what we have to do. At the end of the day, they've demolished the site, and we're all stuck living with that building site, as Councillor Eddy says, until they do something with it. So I'd like to suggest that it might be good. I would certainly appreciate the ability to see a co-living space along these lines. And I appreciate we could go and see, for example, the co-living space mentioned in the report. They might be good enough to let us have a little poke around. Equally, we can go and look at a student accommodation block, of which there are many in the city, where we could see what living at this kind of density looks like, and see if we find it acceptable for families. But if for no other reason than to shore up our position on any kind of appeal, let's bend over backwards. Let's defer this to give us time to really see what this would look like in practice, and possibly also to give the developer time to work with the officers to see if they can assuage some of these concerns as well. Seems like a reasonable middle ground, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, so you've kind of made a proposal there. We'll come back to that in a second, that proposal, about whether it will be seconded and stuff like that. Richard, sorry.
Apologise for actually, but before the committee met that in March last year, we actually deliberately went to a co-living scheme in, I believe, Haymarket, particularly because it was a new concept, or newish concept, so that would allow members to have some idea. And I have to say, I'm not a great fan of further deferral. Already applicants are increasingly being stretched by financial problems of unviability, and I don't think we should add to their problem.
Okay. We obviously we have a process we go through with these applications. We're going to do that, and then we might, as a result of that, come back to what you're saying. Has anyone got anything else that they want to say as part of the debate, or respond to anything that's been said? Yeah, go on, Al.
I might just like to add that I'm a firm believer in quality over quantity, and I just don't think it's fair to squeeze students or small families into such tight compartments. And I also wanted to add that I've actually lived in the dorms where 8 people had to share a kitchen, and it's not a good time. It's not for fun. One bit. What actually tends to happen is that people don't clear up, that they use each other's stuff and don't ask, and it just creates quite a toxic environment in the flat, and I just don't think that will help in terms of young people's mental health. So for that reason, I'll agree with Councillor Pulteney, and I think the developers just need to go back and have a rethink about this plan. Thanks.
Okay. Ellie, go ahead.
Sorry, try and keep it quick. I think, yeah, I share some of those concerns, I suppose, and I know that we're not here to create a co-living SPD, and that this is, as you say, compliant, but I think we need to understand it more. As you said, it's a new thing to us, and most of us are new on this committee, and you may have had the advantage of seeing it before, but we haven't, and we're seeing more and more of these, and this is one of the most significant ones that we've seen and are likely to see in a while, I think. And you can look at the numbers, and the numbers, I totally get that the numbers, is compliant, but the thought of not having that amenity space within easy reach, I think, is a concern. And the balconies, I agree, would make a massive difference if you're living in this kind of setup. I'm really on the fence at the moment. I think I would just like to understand co-living on this scale much more before I felt confident about making a decision. We've seen some go through that we've not been happy with, and we probably wouldn't put through in the future. And I think also this would really feed into our understanding. I'm on the local plan working group, and are very keen to get that co-living SPD done because it just feels so important. But I think personally, I think I need to understand the whole setup much more. Sorry, that's not very conclusive.
Thank you. Anyone else want to contribute to this debate? I'm aware that there's been a sort of semi-proposal, but obviously we need to go through the process. What I'm interested in is whether that's whether that's actually a viable option for us to kind of defer and then go and ask the applicant to. I mean, what is it? I'm not quite clear what the proposal is. So, do you want to just reiterate that?
I'm hypothecating, Chair, because we do have a process to follow. What I would want to make clear is I'm not in a place where I could vote for this. Rather than vote against it, I would rather advocate for something, A, to give the developer more time to work with officers to deal with some of these concerns, and to give us a chance to either find out more, or ideally I would want to go and see somewhere that operates along these principles. I don't know where the nearest place is, but I can think of places within the city, as I say, mostly student accommodation, I have to say, but where you do have co-living at this scale, it just happens under a different name. So that would be the proposal I would make if the officer's recommendation were to fall.
Okay. Can I ask for your comment on that? Or either of your comments, I don't know who.
Yeah, I mean, I've just got an immediate thought on that, just in terms of the old market site that's been mentioned in the report. The visit to that was possible previously because the applicant for an application that was being considered at committee was the same sort of applicant and operator of that site. So in terms of arranging access and being invited into that building to have a look, we were able to arrange that at that time. In this situation, the applicant isn't the operator of that site, so we'd essentially be seeking to enter a private building, which there's obviously issues there in terms of us being able to arrange that potentially. So that's just one immediate thought on that.
Okay. Yeah, it's a strange concept, I suppose, in that sense, asking to be going to a particular place but not necessarily being able to have access to it. I'm minded. Oh, Zoe, go on. You got your hand up. Go on.
I just wanted to share very briefly an experience I had when I lived with 8 other people. So I have my mother's from Malta, and so I love Maltese food, which is a little bit bizarre, I'm not going to lie. And it got to the point where my roommates found it so bizarre, it smells different to like regular food, well, English food and stuff like that, that I would not cook dinner around the times that other people would have to cook dinner. And I would actually wait until 3 a.m. to cook my dinner because I was so afraid of the comments about the food that I would make. Now, that was with 8 people, and I've kind of grown a little bit of a thicker skin, not much, but a bit more of a thicker skin. And now it's either like it or you lump it. But for young people, and especially the more people you're putting in an environment, the more people you're going to have these kinds of differences with. And maybe it was me they just wanted to make fun of, but it could have been my food as well. So I just think that the more people you're putting into a kitchen where you want to be able to make your own food when you want it. I'm also a really messy person, and nobody should be forced to live with me without knowing what I'm like to live with first. So I think these are just all things that make me really, really skeptical about co-living, is that you don't know who you're going to go into this with a lot of the time. You don't know what they're like. You don't know what their cleaning style's like. I have a friend who's tried co-living in Brighton a lot, and she hated it. No matter how many cleaning rotas she made, or cleaning wheels, or ways to make cleaning fun, the people that she lived with, and she lived with lots of different peoples over the years, they never got on board. And so I think it's just personally a recipe for disaster.
Okay, so go on, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I wanted to just clarify the kitchen point. It might be sort of persuasive, it might not be, but I just think there's a bit of confusion here. So the co-living block is individual studios, and each studio will have its own private kitchen. So there'll be no need for anybody to get in a lift to get to a kitchen or anything like that. It will be small, that's the nature of the type of accommodation, but they will have individual kitchens. There will be additional communal kitchens. The student blocks, some of the units will need to share kitchens. I've had a look at the plans. I haven't got all the plans in front of me, but I've had a look at the plans which I've got, and I think it's around 6 or 7 beds sharing a kitchen. But there's a mixture of shared facilities and individual facilities in the student block. But in terms of the co-living, there will be individual kitchens in each studio.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. I'm minded to I'm not going to seek another member. I will move a motion in accordance with the recommendation, which is to approve this application. So I require a seconder. Would anyone like to second that?
Could I second that, please?
Thank you, Richard. So we are going to vote on that motion to go with the officer recommendation, which is to approve. I'll just go round and ask you for your votes, whether you're for the officer recommendation or against. So again, in random order, firstly, Councillor Classic.
Did not want to go first. 4.
Thank you. Councillor Poultney.
Against.
Councillor Eddy. 4. Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Against.
Okay. Councillor Ralston.
Against.
Councillor Al-Maghrabi.
Against.
Councillor Breyer, that's me. Against. Councillor Hornchen.
Against.
Councillor Peat.
Against.
So I think that fell 7-2. So I'm now seeking another proposal from a member of the committee, and I think Councillor Poultney, go ahead.
In which case, Chair, I would propose that we defer our decision in order for the reasons of allowing the developer time to work with officers, deal with some of the concerns that have been raised here. If those concerns cannot be dealt with, to enable the officer to prepare grounds for refusal based on the discussions that we've had, and also to provide time to allow members of the committee, hopefully in an organised and reasonable fashion, to visit some comparable sites where we could see similar arrangements in action, if not identical, so that we're able to come to this with more of a realistic and grounded sense of what living in a block like this would be like, and hopefully assuage some of our concerns about the proposal in front of us. Does that sound reasonable?
Can I ask for your comments on that proposal?
Just as in order to allow me to give the developer directions, could you just clarify what specific concerns it is?
I would say, in terms of the harm caused by the changes in the application in front of us, it pertains to the loss of residential amenity caused by the loss of the balconies, the amenity space in the building, the travel distance within the building to place of amenity, the heat. I think the officer actually provided a fairly decent list of them in the report. In terms of the on-balance harm, as in the quantum, as it were, as a whole, it is worth acknowledging the number of bed spaces provided and the city centre location, the sustainability of the site, and all of the rest of the things that were in the original report. But equally, I think we have to, it was balanced against significant damage to heritage assets and a number of other factors. Again, these were all mentioned in the decision record of the original report. Is that fair? Sorry, I could probably give you a more comprehensive list if I just went through it. If Councillor Peat wishes to add anything, I'd be more than welcome.
If you're all right with it, I would love to see an equality impact assessment for the original, and then an equality impact assessment for the proposed. If you're happy with that.
I would absolutely welcome that. I think there are significant equality impact changes that would be felt by anyone who's has any sort of disability in any number of ways, as well as characteristics such as age and people who have children or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lewis, back to you. How does that feel like something we can go back with?
Certainly that gives me some steer. I'd think just for the record, I should clarify that in terms of the harm to the heritage assets, the actual level of harm was less than substantial. But that's a technical term, and I need to do that for the record. But certainly in terms of the impacts on amenity, that's something that I can raise with the applicant and see if it can be addressed. Whether we can organise a visit to a comparable site or not, I don't know, but we can certainly have a discussion about it.
Okay. That has been moved by Councillor Poultney. Is anyone seconding that as a proposal?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you very much for seconding it. So we will take a vote on Councillor Poultney's proposal there.
Just absolutely clarify it, just paraphrase it. Wouldn't mind.
Yeah. What do you want clarifying?
What we're voting on.
We're voting on everything that Guy just said, basically.
Yeah, but can you no, paraphrase, never mind.
Well, I mean, it's all the things that he said. I mean, I'll just be repeating him, so... It's going back to the applicant and asking them to look at the distances, look at the... I am just repeating what Guy's just said, so you know what I'm saying.
Just a point. If we refuse an application, doesn't it get deferred automatically?
No.
Okay.
We're not refusing. This isn't a proposal to refuse. This is a proposal to defer. We're not...
Not yet. No, this one is. But if we normally, any planning permission, we refuse it, we say no.
Well,
it defers automatically.
No.
Not? Okay, all right.
No, the other way around. I think you're thinking of it the wrong way around. I think it defer and then it refuse if we have reasons. And that's part of what Guy said, is that we defer it, and then if it comes back that it's not, in line with what we'd expect, then we would hope to have some refusal reasons. Okay. Is everyone clear? Semi-clear, at least. So I'll just go round and ask if you're for or against Councillor Poultney's proposal. So firstly is Councillor Al-Maghrabi.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hornchin.
Against.
Councillor Poultney.
For.
Councillor Ralston.
For.
Councillor Breyer, that's me, for. Councillor Eddy.
Against.
Councillor Freeman.
For.
Councillor Pete.
For.
And Councillor Classic.
Abstain.
Thank you. So I think I've got 6, 4. What have you got, Jeremy?
6, 2 against and 1 abstention.
6, 4, 2 against and 1 abstention. So that does carry. We will therefore seek further information and more negotiation around this. Is there anything else that officers that you need at this point, or should we talk about that outside of the meeting? Okay. Thanks very much. We're going to take a short break. Only take 10 minutes, but I would actually like to make this 5 because we are running out of time. We're not running out of time, but we need to go more quickly. Thank you. So if we come back at 10 to 9, 8:50. We're going to move on to Bristol Waste Cycling Facility on Albert Road. I've completely lost where I am. Oh yes, no, there's no public forum, that's correct, and that coheres with what I can see in front of me, which is no people sitting in the public gallery. So let's go straight over to Peter. I've got your name right, haven't I? Yes, for the officer presentation on this one.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application, another Section 73 application, and you're back in Albert Road, so but just over the road and round the corner a bit. So if you're heading toward the fruit market, just give you an idea of where it is. This application is to remove a planning condition that was imposed in 2017 on an application at the Bristol Waste Recycling Facility. This condition controlled the hours when they could use the baler and sorting line and restricted it to 7 a.m. to 11 p.m, Mondays to Sundays, including bank holidays. This application seeks, before you this evening, seeks to remove that condition altogether. So in effect, they would have the option of being able to use that baler throughout 24/7, basically. Bristol Waste, keen to considerations, Bristol Waste desperate need of this additional capacity. It's not to say that they would be doing this all the time, but just the level of refuse that they are getting through means they are desperately in need of just this option being open to them. There's no other change to the operation of the site at all, so all the other conditions remain in place. In particular, there's a condition that says that there can be no more than 5 decibels of noise at the boundary of the site. So that stays, no additional vehicles, and so in effect, it won't really look a lot different to how it looks now. We consulted widely way back in 2011, I think. A lot of residents in Totterdown were consulted, so 778 residents were consulted, and as a result, we got 29 responses back on this. And that's why we brought it, because there was a level of concern apparently, but no public statements this evening. And just to add, Environmental Health Officer Mark Curtis has reviewed this and raises no objection, but he's here to answer questions should you have them. Very quickly, Building D is the shed in which this baler is positioned, so it's inside. That's just an aerial photo. That's what the shed looks like. That's the level of rubbish. That was taken on the 3rd of January this year, so just after Christmas. So it gives you an idea. Those are the lorries we're all familiar with. They come and dump it there. They then push it onto that conveyor belt. It goes up that conveyor belt. This is a baler, just so you know. And if you see that yellow box down there, it comes out there, and then it's put into kind of these bales and then taken away and removed. So our recommendation is to approve, subject to the conditions that remain set out in the report. It's simply to remove this condition to give them an option to work 24/7 should they wish. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Oh, question straight away. Can I ask a question straight away? Oh no, I think it's been answered actually. It was about the transport. It sounds like there's no difference in the way that the transport operates. Okay. I don't know who to go. Let's go to Serena and then Guy.
Very basic question, apologies. This is just card, isn't it? Does the baler just deal with card?
No, it's also plastic as well. It's the only thing it is not is glass, because glass is noisy and doesn't go up that conveyor belt, basically.
Yeah,
you can't
that's
play
why
it.
I was asking, really. Thank you.
Okay, Guy. And then Al.
Thanks, Chair. It was just to, having now seen the photo, I'm resisting every urge to indulge the fantasies of the kinds of documentaries I used to see as a kid and say, we need a site visit, let's go and see, it looks really cool. But, all joking aside, there have been objections to this. And I just want to be really, really clear, and I appreciate there is an operational issue at Bristol Waste, but just to be absolutely clear that the material planning considerations pertinent to this are to do with the unacceptable loss of amenity suggested by a small number of respondents to do with noise, as in we should not apply our minds in any way to the commercial operations of a private company that this organisation happens to own. That is absolutely not a material consideration in this case. Is that, I want to check that that is the case. There isn't sort of enabling development or some sort of civic aspect to Bristol Waste's operation that we can take into account. It is solely around the noise issue that's been raised by the objectors.
That's absolutely correct, Chair. And just to add that the manager of this waste facility was very clear that the public, he does tours for the public, so you can go and have a look round. So there you are. Thank you.
Okay, I had Al who put hand up, yeah, and then
yeah. I just wanted to ask. So the sound is a 5 decibels. What's that comparable to, and how far away are the closest homes? Those are my questions. Thanks.
Yeah. So the I'd hate to say that Peter got something wrong, but it's not 5 decibels at the boundary of the site. The condition which we put on most planning applications is that the noise from the baler, any residential property, should be no more than 5 dB, so should be at least 5 decibels below the background level at that premises. So it's, and what we've found, if you have a noise level which, say the background level at the nearest residential property is 50 decibels, if we introduce a new noise of 45 decibels, that's going to have very little effect on the overall level, and that's not going to be a level that somebody would notice. If we introduce another level of the same noise, that would increase the noise level, and that would be slightly noticed. So we already have that condition on the consent. I've gone out, checked everything. We're satisfied that they can still comply with that condition if they operate 24/7. Okay.
Zoe and then Katya.
So my first question is more in relation to smell than sound. I'm not sure if that can follow in with this. Some of the objections were in regards to the smell it produces on warmer weather days. And I was just wondering, so if it's tin, cardboard and plastic, it very well may have like food waste on it. Does it get cleaned at all prior to being baled?
Forgive me, I do not know. All I can comment on is when I was in that room, it didn't smell, believe it or not.
Fair enough.
But that was on the 3rd of January, so...
Fair enough. And then just following on from Al's point, so like at like 4 a.m. when all you can hear is the odd fox that's screaming, is it going to still be quieter than like the dead of night, technically? If it has to just be 5 decibels lower than the surrounding sound.
Yes, I mean, in that area, unfortunately for people, it's not the quietest part of Bristol. Right, so it's quite industrial and there's quite a few roads around there. So the noise level is reasonably high. And looking at sort of background levels that the consultants have previously taken there, it stays relatively sort of stable throughout the day. So I'm satisfied from checking that application and other applications we've had with background noise surveys in the area that noise is going to be well below the background level and shouldn't have any effect to any residential properties.
Amazing.
Okay, Katya.
I had the same question as Zoe.
Okay. Any other questions? Move on to debate. Anyone want to say anything in this debate? Zoe?
I think we should just vote for this and get out.
Yep. Thank you for that. Serena, have you got your hand up?
Very quick, I promise. Just to say, while I sympathise with residents who might have had concerns about this, I have no problems voting for it. I don't think it's going to add any additional noise from what I can tell. And it's obviously needed. But I think at the same time, we always have to bear in mind residents' concerns and take them seriously, which I think we have. Thank you.
I just did a calculation using my laptop's calculator. The 29 objections out of 778 properties, that is 3.72% people. And I'm not a person who goes along just with the idea that if that's a very small percentage of people, we shouldn't listen to them, but it does show that 96.28% of people didn't see it necessary to put in an objection if they got the letter, which they would have done, and would have presumably had a view on it, but just didn't think it was worthwhile. So that's something I think we can reassure ourselves with. It is reasonable, but I think in this case, I do think that the application is entirely reasonable. So I will move, unless anyone has anything else that they want to say desperately, I will move the recommendation of the officers. Oh, thank you, Zoe, for so swiftly recommending it as a second. So we will vote on that proposal. I've lost my randomizer. Oh, okay, we'll throw that out for a second. Okay, so just go round, and if you're in favour of the motion, just say for, and if you're against, say against. So I'll go first. I'm for.
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 Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. That has been approved. And that concludes the meeting. The next meeting, I think... Oh. That's the first round of applause at DCA since I've chaired it. Brilliant. Oh, thank you very much.
Can I just mention one small thing, nothing to do with anything we discussed today. Is it possible just to have some jug of water and some glasses next time, right? Because a lot of people have come from work straight off.
Thanks for that suggestion. I think
something, because it's an evening meeting. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, can I just close the meeting and then we can have a conversation about that? So the next meeting, I think, is on something like in March, but of course DCB is next week. Thank you. Bye.